At some point, I became aware that I had been living with a condition all my life. I always felt like I was waiting on the next thing. And it was a condition that kept me from being fully present where I was. It evolved and it went by different names as I started to identify it in my young adult life. I started realizing it was a problem, and it grew into what I nicknamed the greener grass syndrome. That some of you may struggle with as well, where you're not only waiting for the next thing, you begin attaching things like dissatisfaction and envy and maybe even covetousness with what could be, and just this general sense of discontent starts to pervade your life as you are just waiting on what's next. It started as a much more innocent and subconscious thing from as long as I can remember. When I was 4, I don't remember much about being 4, except the feeling of wanting to be 5. And my 5th birthday was one of the first birthdays I remember what a big deal my parents made out of it. And all year they spent telling me about this weird thing I was going to start called kindergarten. And what I remember about turning 5 was beginning to wait to turn 6. When I was in elementary school, I waited for middle school. When I was in middle school, I waited for high school. When I was in high school, I waited for college or whatever was going to come next. When I learned to ride a bike, all I could wait for was the training wheels to come off. And then when they finally did, and I mastered riding a bike without training wheels, all I could think about was driving a car. And I don't think I'm alone in this. Have you noticed that we just have this tendency to even wish days away? Maybe wish whole life stages away. We rush so hard toward the next that we have trouble being present where we are. I remember at our first church, we moved there when our oldest child was only 10 months old. And I was an associate pastor, and our senior pastor told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Don't wish their days away." And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I know every stage and phase is hard. The one you're in is hard, and they're all going to have things that you just can't wait for it to be over, and you're glad to leave it behind. But every phase and stage also has things that you will only get to experience then, and it's precious, and it's sweet, and you will miss it when it's gone. Don't wish it away. Enjoy every moment." And that taught me something about being fully present, because when you're fully enjoying the present as it is and accepting everything it has, it's complicated. Because there's usually things to be thankful for, like we just celebrated, but there also might be some hard stuff, maybe even some struggle or some pain. But God has been teaching me for a long, long time now what it means to be fully present. And this is hard for a culture that is so used to waiting on the next thing. Culture tells us that we never have enough. We're waiting to accomplish enough. We're waiting to be enough. We're waiting for the frustration or the problem or the struggle just to go away and be done with. We're sold a lie that the next product or the next pursuit or the next technological advance will finally get us to the place that we've always hoped for. It's here, the advertisements tell us. The wait is over. And about the time what we've been waiting for begins to dissolve in our mouths, we hear rumors that the next thing is right around the corner, and we begin the unsatisfied discontent process all over again. And so we wait in drive-thrus, in carpool lines, in traffic, especially this time of year. God bless us. We wait for the foursome on Tuesday. We wait for the doctor's appointment on Thursday. Then when we finally get to the appointment, we wait and wait for the person we're there to see. And lest you think I'm picking on other professions, we wait for sermons to be concluded, especially when they show Popeyes on the screen and make us hungry. We wait for Mr. Right, or we wait for Mrs. Sure, okay. We wait for a baby. And then maybe if God blesses our family with a baby, a child, a grandchild, a niece, a nephew, then we just start waiting for the baby to do something. We wait for the baby to sit up, and then once they sit up, we wait for the baby to crawl, and we walk around with our camera app always on in the background just in case. And then we wait for them to be out of diapers. And then once they finally get out of diapers, eventually, we wait for them to move out. And then when they finally move out, we wait for them to come back home. We wait for retirement. And then we wait to feel useful again. Waiting, and yes, we wait for Jesus to come back, if only. And as God has been teaching me the value of being fully present, I'm learning that to become really good at waiting, you actually have to become better at being fully present. To become good at waiting for what will be, you have to become good at being present to what is. Some years ago, I was talked into being a part of a church drama production, and it was during this time of year, the busiest time of the year. I had a long to-do list. I felt under-equipped and underprepared to tackle everything on it, and suddenly I found myself sitting in a dressing room with a bunch of church members and nothing to do. And I began to feel anxious. But it wasn't anxiety about performing this thing that we had been rehearsing for. It was about not being able to do all the things I felt like I was supposed to do in that moment. I was just sitting there. And in the middle of that moment, I sensed God interrupting my anxious thoughts with a sentence that I will never forget. He said, "Here you are, a pastor, in this room with 30 other members of your flock on a day of the week that you normally wouldn't be together, and you're worried about what you're not getting done." And then he said this, "Your presence is the most valuable thing you have to offer." I was floored. Your presence is the most valuable thing you have to offer. Now, it's not the only thing you have to offer, and I don't believe God was just telling me that because I'm a pastor. I believe that's God's word to every person that would follow Jesus. Maybe you have stuff to offer in addition to your presence, but your presence is the most valuable thing you have to offer. Not what you prepare, not what you produce, not what you perform, your presence. Today's message is titled "The Hope of Waiting." Not the irritation of waiting, not the frustration of waiting, not the anxiety of waiting. The hope of waiting, because according to the Word of God and the testimony of the saints, hope does its deepest work in the waiting. And this is what Advent is all about. The word Advent means coming or arrival. It's a season of waiting, but Christianity has never been about passive waiting. It is a faith of active waiting, of preparing and tending and watching. Think about it. When someone comes to your home, maybe some of you were just here this week, or maybe you will be in the weeks to come, or you're preparing to go to someone else's home. When you're preparing to have someone in your home or go to someone else's home, what do? You just sit around doing nothing? No, you prepare, right? You clean, you anticipate, you get things ready, and Advent teaches us to wait like that, to prepare Him room. We are the people between the first Advent and the second Advent, between the manger and the trumpets, and God's people have always been a waiting people. Long before the Messiah ever came, a couple named Abraham and Sarah waited on what God promised them, a child that would become a family, that would become a nation. And that nation, Israel, waited for 400 years in the land of Egypt. After exile, they waited for restoration. And then between the books of Malachi and Matthew in our Bibles, most of our Bibles have this one blank page that represents another 400 years of waiting, perceived silence where the voices of God's prophets had seemingly gone quiet, and yet God was not absent in any of those moments. You want an epiphany this morning? We so often read the Bible as one long story of us waiting on God, but we are not the only ones waiting. In all of those stories, God was waiting too. God is waiting right now. God was waiting for hearts to be ready. He was waiting for the harvest to ripen. He was waiting for a young woman named Mary and a young man named Joseph. He was waiting for a voice that would cry out in the wilderness, "Prepare the way of the Lord." One year, my Advent devotional was a book by Dietrich Bonhoeffer called "God is in the Manger." And Bonhoeffer said something that got my attention. He called waiting the austere blessedness of hopefully doing without. This is the full quote. "Whoever does not know the austere blessedness of waiting, that is, of hopefully doing without, will never experience the full blessing of fulfillment." To put another way, if we never wait for anything, we will never fully enjoy anything. Some of our kids, maybe even some of us adults, are hopefully waiting for some pretty big things this Christmas. And on Christmas Day, we will find out whether we have been hopefully waiting for a short time, or we will be hopefully waiting for much longer until we no longer have to do without. And that's how it feels to wait on Jesus a lot of times, isn't it? Just how long am I going to have to wait, Lord? But God is also waiting on us. I want to turn to a verse in Revelation, and then I want to go to Mark 13. That's going to be our main text this morning. But before we go to Mark, I want to turn to Revelation chapter 3, particularly one verse. And I'm going to read verses 20 through 22, but I especially want us to focus on verse 20. This is Jesus speaking to the churches, specifically the church in Laodicea in this part, and he says, "Here I am, Jesus. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with that person, and they with me. To the one who is victorious, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I was victorious and sat down with my Father on his throne. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches." Jesus is standing at the door and knocking. What is he doing? Well, he's waiting. He's waiting for someone to let him in. But here's something that I've missed for a long time, and I wonder if maybe you've missed it too. So often we hear this verse, and it's on Christian bookmarks, and there are even paintings that depict this verse, right? Jesus standing outside with shrubbery and this door, and maybe the door doesn't even have a doorknob on the outside. It can only be opened from inside. And we're taught that Jesus is knocking on the door of each of our hearts. And hear me, I think that's true. So I'm not trying to debunk that as a myth or something. I think that's absolutely true. But Mark 13 helped me notice something about this verse in Revelation 3 that I never noticed before, and that is that I am so egocentric that I always think that I'm the main character in my own story. But in the story of God, I am not the main character. And what Mark 13 teaches me is that Jesus is not standing outside the door of my house. Mark 13 teaches all the disciples who would follow Jesus to watch out for the master, that it's not our house he's returning to be let into, it's his house. And Jesus calls his servants to let him in. Mark chapter 13 can be a scary chapter if we don't really understand it. It's the most apocalyptic chapter in all of Mark, and I'm going to come back to that word in a second. But Mark 13, verses 32 through 37, read this way. "But about that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard," says Jesus. "Be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch." Mark 13 is confusing. We only read a few verses. But the reason it's confusing is because we're not totally sure what Jesus is talking about. We think when we read that no one knows that day or hour, and he tells the parable of the master returning to the house, he must be talking about his coming again. And indeed he is. But the reason Mark 13 is confusing is because if you read the verses before this, the disciples are remarking to Jesus about how beautiful the temple is, and Jesus says something very disturbing and confusing. He starts predicting that temple will be torn down and will no longer exist. The disciples, alarmed at his words, say, "Teacher, please tell us when these things will happen and when the end will come." They think they're asking Jesus a one-part question. But we know from history that the temple was destroyed within one generation, 70 AD. The temple was indeed destroyed, just as Jesus prophesied, within one generation of his words. And yet the end of all things did not come, but we still await the second coming of the Messiah. And so when Jesus answers his disciples, he answers in a way that might be confusing because he seems to be mixing these two events. He says, "I tell you the truth, some of you within your generation will see." And then he goes into an event, the day or hour of which no one will know, not even the angels or the Son, but only the Father. And then he tells a parable of the master of the house returning, which we're still waiting for. And as I think about why Jesus kind of mixed his answer, why didn't he make it clear? I'm talking about two separate things. I'm talking about some things that will happen in the short term that will really shake you, and it will feel like the end of all things as you know it. But I'm also talking about this long-term thing that you and all the people who follow me will wait for, and you'll have to have some long-term faith. Why would he answer both of those at the same time? And Eckhart Schnabel, in one of his commentaries, provides an answer that I think is probably the best one I've ever heard. And that's because Jesus was answering that the posture of the disciple for both is the same. We need the same faithful, hopeful, trusting obedience in the short-term shakings that will happen within our lifetime, as we will need for the long-term waiting of Jesus' return whenever that will be. We need the same hopeful faith that when the world is despairing, keeps us as a people with hope and joy that seems radical in the face of what's happening. And so as we look at this chapter, I want to mention a word. And those of you who have taken a New Testament disciple class that we offer at Mulder every other semester, this will be familiar. And all of us have heard this word. Some of us may know what it means in the biblical context, but we're going to wrestle with all of this today. Are you ready for the word? It is apocalypse. Happy Advent and Merry Christmas. Apocalypse. How many of you came to church on the first Sunday of Advent expecting us to talk about the apocalypse? I wonder what you think in your mind when you hear the word apocalypse. Do you think of like the end of days, the end of all things as we know it? Maybe you even have images in your head of a battle, like the Battle of Armageddon depicted in the book of Revelation. Well, would it surprise you to know that the word apocalypse was not first an English word? It's an English transliteration of a Greek word. In fact, it's in our New Testaments of our Bibles, which was originally written in Greek. In fact, you have a whole book in your Bible called the Apocalypse. And if you were to turn all the way to the back in a Greek New Testament, you would find a book with 22 chapters called the Apocalypse of John. That is the one that God gave to his servant John, who wrote it down, exiled in the island of Patmos, to send to the churches. But if you were to read the first verse of the book in Greek, it would say the apocalypse of Jesus the Christ. Now, certainly, it doesn't mean the end of Jesus the Christ. Now, apocalypse is what we translate in English, revelation. And what the word apocalypse really means is an unveiling, like the pulling back of a curtain. This is the revelation that God gave to his servant John. This is the revelation of Jesus the Christ. And so apocalyptic literature in the New Testament and even in the Old Testament is all doing the same thing. It's pulling back the curtain. And here's my question for us today. If we get to the last book in our New Testament, haven't all the books been revealing Jesus the Christ? And if so, why do we need another one that's 22 chapters long to reveal the person that's already been revealed in the rest of the New Testament? And the answer is that all the other books have been revealing who Jesus is from our vantage point, from the perspective of earth. We need a book where God pulls back the curtain, and first he shares with his servant John so that John can then share with all the churches throughout history a vision of reality and the reality of Jesus, not from the vantage point of earth, but from the vantage point of heaven. Wouldn't that be amazing? And so John is transported up into the heavenly throne room, and he starts trying to put language to what he sees in the events that are happening. And he sees things from the past, he sees the present, he sees the future. The cross and the resurrection of Jesus are redefined from the perspective of heaven. And he sees the finality of God's victory over all things and how evil will be bound and all will be put right. And in Mark 13, Jesus is trying to give his disciples something that all of his disciples have needed throughout history: perspective. And so apocalyptic literature is not meant to be scary. It's meant to give us perspective, and it's even meant to give us hope. And Jesus says, yes, some things are going to happen that will be scary. Some things are going to happen that are going to shake you. In fact, it may seem like the end of things as you know it, but all of this apocalyptic messaging is not about destruction, it's about reorientation. So that you no longer look at these events with the despair of earth or the anxiety of those around you, but with the hope of heaven, you see things differently. And you know that even in the waiting, we have to stay awake. So that word in Mark where Jesus says to watch, normally we would hear that as, well, we need to watch for what's going on. We need to watch the news, right? But actually, that word in the original language is about watching our souls. In Greek or in English, we hear keep awake, and we think track every event, look for signs, try to decode, right, what's going on. But actually, in the original language, it means to be spiritually attentive and to stay awake to God. And here's the kicker. We can't stay awake to God when we're asleep to our own souls. We're supposed to be watching for what God is doing in us as these events are going on outside of us. And in the waiting, we are meant to be people with hope. We are meant to be spiritually attentive, awake to God, alert, responsive, and to have relational faith, like a servant faithfully tending the house while the master is away. This is the hope of waiting, to be wakeful and watchful, to have faithfulness and ordinary obedience, prayer, holiness, witness, endurance, love, courage, trust. That's what staying awake looks like. It's not speculation, but stewardship. And Revelation makes this same point, that God wants us to be aware that the child whose birth we are preparing to celebrate is already on the throne. That Jesus is already reigning, even now, even when it doesn't look like it. And he wants to change our worldview. He wants us to become people who wait with hope. So the watchfulness Jesus calls us to is not this kind of paranoid watching, like, look out, Jesus is coming. It's hopeful watching, a joyful expectancy that says, the longer the master is away, the closer I know we are to his return. I have so much hope. I wonder if you've seen this bumper sticker like I have that says, Jesus is coming, look busy. Unfortunately, so many Christians actually live like this. We come to church and we're like, oh yeah, Jesus is in charge. And every Sunday we have to come back and be reminded, oh yeah, Jesus is in charge. Oh, it's the season of Advent. That's right. He not only came, he's coming again. It's as if we're busy living our real lives, and when Jesus comes back, all of a sudden we'll get real concerned about being a sheep rather than a goat. Like when the trumpet sounds, we just hope there's maybe a 5-minute gap between whatever comes next so we can shove everything over that we've been working on and open our Bibles and get serious about Jesus. But that's not his call. That's not his invitation. That's not what he charges his disciples to live like. Neither does he charge us to live in fear, as if we're always looking around worried about who's going to burst through the door. In the parable, it's not some robber or intruder or threat that's knocking at the door. It's the master, and he wants to know if we'll be awake to let him in and say, Master, we've been waiting on you. Welcome back to your house. This is your house, not mine. And I am so grateful to get to be one of your servants who lets you in. Jesus wants to know if his servants are awake, alert, engaged, actively waiting. This is the kind of waiting that's so hopeful and joyful. It's focused and it's on a mission. It lives with a holy sense of urgency, not panicked, but purposeful. It is, after all, Jesus' house, and it's our job to welcome him home. And we do this exteriorly with lights and garland and evergreen trees and candles in the windows. But we have to do this interiorly as well. And if we're not careful, this season will become so much about the exterior that of all seasons of the year, this is when we'll neglect the interior the most. And we'll get so caught up in the things that we do, the traditions, that we'll forget why we even started doing them in the first place, and we'll neglect what God is trying to do in our very souls to wake us up. And while we're waiting for him to knock on the door of his house, today he is knocking on the doors of our hearts, and our souls, and our lives, and our families. And so I'm going to ask you, as Jesus asked the church, how are you waiting? How are you waiting? Are you waiting passively, numbly, or distractedly? Or are you waiting actively? That is, present and awake and listening, responding to the Spirit who's present and active with us in the waiting, here, now, today. And so I want to take a moment and just do some soul searching as we close out this message. And while John Michael plays, I want us to acknowledge that this is a space where we've come to meet with God. And we're in a season at Mulder Church where our fall semester of Wednesday night groups and classes has ended. We're in this holiday season. They'll start up again in the spring. And so many of us have found a place where we can group up. Maybe you've already done it this morning in a Sunday school class, but we found places to group up and to ask really soul-searching questions. And I wonder if we might do that here, now. And it might be hard for some of us to feel put on the spot or to put a time limit on it, but we are unified in our desire to seek God's presence together in this place right now. And so I wonder if we might begin to open our hearts and ask some questions and let God speak. And maybe He will in this moment. Maybe He will later today or this week as we open ourselves to Him in this season. So if you have something to write with, I would encourage you to get it out now. These questions are on the sermon discussion guides if you picked one up outside, or you can get out your phone and just take a note or something. But a couple of weeks ago, we learned that if we can just quiet and still ourselves and fix our eyes on Jesus and pay attention to those free-flowing, spontaneous thoughts, that God might actually want to speak through those, that still small voice, that gentle whisper, and that we want to write down what He says so that we can act on it. So I want to invite you during this moment of soul searching to ask a few questions. Number one, what keeps you from being fully present? Like right now in your life, with the way that you currently are, what keeps you most often from being fully present emotionally, relationally, spiritually, maybe even physically, to those you care about or those in your sphere of influence or even just strangers that need help? What keeps you from being fully present in this season of your life? Would you just take a moment and ask God to help show that to you honestly in His presence right now? And if you have more, you can keep writing, and I want you to take this question home with you and continue to let God help you answer it. But I want to ask kind of a part B of this first question. If you are able to identify anything keeping you from being fully present, is there a change that you could make to be more present in this season of your life, in this, even in the waiting? Is there something you can do to address that thing that's a barrier for you right now? Question number 2 is, what interior preparations could you make this Advent to welcome Jesus more fully into your daily life? Habits, confessions, certain conversations that need to be had, certain changes that you need to make. What interior preparations, not just exterior, but what interior preparations could you make to welcome Jesus more fully into your daily life? Would you ask Him that now? Third, and this might be the most challenging, and I definitely want you to write this down and take it with you, because this might be a longer conversation between you and the Lord. Is there an area of your life where maybe you feel like you've been waiting on God and God is actually waiting on you? Where God has been nudging you, whispering to you, knocking at your door? Is there something He's been asking you? What are you waiting for? Because it's not me. Is there something that's been holding you back, or some area of your life that you've been not fully ready to let God into? As we use these questions to get honest about welcoming Jesus more into our lives this season, what He promises will happen next is pretty amazing. Back to Revelation 3:20. He says that when we do open the door, and this is the part where I am talking about our hearts and lives and households and families, when we open the door, He promises, I will come in and dine with them, and they with me. He will share His presence. He will share His table. He will share His life. He will share the hope and the peace and the joy and the love and the light that only He can give in this season if we will just let Him in. And that's the hope of waiting, that even as we wait for Him to come back and set everything right, in the meantime, comings of Christ are happening throughout our day and throughout our lives. He's trying to come in. Heaven is breaking in. Will we be awake? Will we be alert? And will we be those who alert others to the reality of God in our midst? Our hope is not just a generic optimism. It's anchored in the confidence of the reign of Christ Waiting becomes hopeful when it's rooted in the confidence, not in circumstances, but in the enthroned Messiah. So in the waiting, let every heart prepare him room, and heaven and nature sing.